What if the proudest financial decision of your life is actually the one that's costing you the most? Renee saved for 11 years, not casually, aggressively. She cut vacations, she drove a 2009 Honda with 140,000 miles on it, she packed lunch every single day for a decade. Her friends thought she was obsessive, her family thought she was paranoid, but Renee had a number in her head, and she was getting there no matter what. The number was $340,000, the price of a three-bedroom house in her city. No mortgage, no bank, no debt. She wanted to own it outright, free and clear. She wanted to be the kind of person who owed nothing to nobody. 4 months after buying that house with cash, she ran the numbers differently. Not the numbers she'd been running for 11 years. Different numbers. The ones nobody had shown her. What she found changed everything she thought she understood about wealth. She hadn't won. She'd made the most expensive mistake of her financial life, and she'd made it feeling like a genius. Here's exactly what Renee missed, and here is what you are going to do instead. The first thing you need to understand is that a house is not an investment the way most people think it is. This is the foundational belief the entire middle class is built on, and it is quietly, mathematically wrong. Not emotionally wrong, not morally wrong, mathematically wrong. When Renee put $340,000 into that house, she did not invest $340,000. She locked $340,000 inside an illiquid asset that generates zero cash flow, requires ongoing maintenance costs averaging 1 to 2% of the home's value every year, and cannot be partially accessed in an emergency without refinancing, selling, or taking on new debt. The house did not put money in her pocket. The house consumed it. Here is the number that should have stopped her. If Renee had taken that same $340,000 and invested it in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund instead, and bought the same house using a 20% down payment mortgage, her $340,000 would have had the opportunity to compound at the market's historical average of roughly 10% annually. Over 20 years, that $340,000 becomes approximately $2,287,000. She chose the house outright. The house in that same 20 years at the national average appreciation rate of 3.5% annually becomes worth approximately $679,000. Same starting point, completely different financial outcome. The gap between those two numbers is $1,608,000. That is what paying cash for a house costs you, not in monthly payments, not in interest, in compounding opportunity you handed to nobody. It simply ceased to exist. But here's the part that makes this story more complicated and more important, because this is not simply take a mortgage, invest the difference. That is the surface layer. Underneath it is a structural reality about how debt, leverage, and the tax code interact that the wealthiest real estate owners in this country have understood for decades, and almost nobody in the middle class has been taught. Let me show you the actual machinery. When a bank lends you $272,000, which is 80% of a $340,000 house, they are not doing you a favor. They are using your creditworthiness to deploy their capital at a profit. You pay them interest, they lend your deposits to other borrowers. The entire system is designed to keep capital moving. The bank does not want you to pay off your mortgage early. A paid-off mortgage is a dead asset to them. But here's what they will never explain to you. That same leverage they're using against you, you can use for yourself. This is the concept that separates how wealthy people think about real estate from how the middle class thinks about it. The wealthy do not see a mortgage as a burden, they see it as a tool. Specifically, they see it as a mechanism that allows them to control a $340,000 asset while only deploying $68,000 of their own capital and redirecting the remaining $272,000 into assets that generate returns. The technical term for this is leveraged arbitrage. The practical translation is simpler. You borrow money at 7%. You invest the freed capital at 10%. The spread between those two numbers, 3% on $272,000 is $8,160 per year working in your favor before you have done a single other thing. That spread compounds every year. Now let me walk you through what this actually looks like in practice, not in theory, in real, specific numbers with a real decision framework you can apply to your next house purchase. Meet the decision Renee should have made. Instead of paying $340,000 cash, Renee puts down $68,000, 20%, and takes a 30-year fixed mortgage on the remaining $272,000 at 7% interest. Her monthly payment is approximately $1,810. She takes the remaining $272,000 and splits it deliberately. $220,000 goes into a diversified S&P 500 index fund, and $52,000 goes into a high-yield savings account as a dedicated mortgage coverage reserve, enough to cover her mortgage payment for over 2 years without touching a single dollar of her investments. Here's what that decision looks like at the 10-year mark. Her $220,000 in the S&P 500, compounding at 10% annually, has grown to approximately $570,000. She has made 120 mortgage payments, totaling $217,200. Of that $217,200, approximately $183,000 went to interest, and $34,200 reduced her principal. Her remaining mortgage balance is roughly $237,800. So at year 10, Renee has $570,000 in investments, $52,000 still sitting in her reserve, grown to roughly $68,000 at 4% in a high-yield account, and a house worth approximately $479,000 against a remaining $237,800, giving her $241,200 in home equity. Total net position, approximately $879,200. Compare that to the cash buyer version of Renee at year 10. She owns a house worth $479,000 outright. She has no investment portfolio. She has no reserve account. Her entire decade of wealth accumulation sits inside one illiquid asset she cannot spend, cannot invest, and cannot deploy without borrowing against her own property. Total net position, $479,000. The gap at year 10 alone is $400,200, and it keeps widening every single year after that because compound interest does not stop. It accelerates. Now, here's where the strategy gets precise, because knowing the concept is not enough. The execution has 4 specific components that determine whether this works or collapses. Get all 4 right, and the strategy runs itself. Miss any one of them, and it becomes a liability. Component 1, the mortgage rate threshold. This entire strategy hinges on one mathematical condition, that your expected investment return exceeds your mortgage interest rate. At 7% mortgage interest and 10% historical market returns, the spread is 3%. That spread is your engine. If mortgage rates rise to 11% and market returns average 8%, the math reverses and the strategy fails. So before you execute this, run the current numbers. The spread needs to be positive. Right now, in 2026, with 30-year fixed rates sitting between 6.5% and 7.5%, and the S&P 500's long-term average holding at 10%, the spread exists. It's real, but you verify it at the time of your decision, not based on what you read 6 months ago. Component 2. The mortgage must be a 30-year fixed rate, not a 15-year, not an adjustable rate. 30 years fixed. Here's why. A 30-year mortgage gives you the lowest mandatory monthly payment, which maximizes the capital you redirect into investments. A 15-year mortgage cuts your payment period in half, but nearly doubles your monthly payment, which reduces the capital available to invest and shrinks your spread. An adjustable mortgage introduces interest rate risk that can eliminate your spread entirely if rates move against you. The 30-year fixed is the only structure that protects your monthly cash flow, locks your cost of borrowing, and keeps the maximum capital working in the market. Component 3. The mortgage that 20% down payment is not negotiable. Below 20%, you trigger private mortgage insurance, PMI. PMI costs between 0.5% and 1.5% of your loan amount annually. On a $272,000 loan, that is between $1,360 and $4,080 per year, paid to an insurance company that protects the bank, not you. PMI is the single most effective way to silently destroy the spread that makes this entire strategy work. It is money that generates zero return, builds zero equity, and disappears completely without a trace. Put 20% down. Remove PMI from the equation entirely. If you do not have 20% yet, wait until you do. Entering this strategy with PMI is like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. Component 4. The redirected capital must go into a passive index fund, not individual stocks, not crypto, not a business your brother-in-law is starting. This is the component most people corrupt. They take the freed capital, feel confident, and start making active investment decisions. Individual stocks introduce concentration risk. Crypto introduces volatility that can wipe out years of spread in a single quarter. Active management introduces fee drag. The strategy works because it is boring. A low-cost S&P 500 index fund with an expense ratio under 0.10%, FZROX at 0%, VOO at 0.03%, SCHB at 0.03%, run on autopilot, touched as infrequently as possible. The moment you start actively managing the investment side of this strategy, you introduce decision risk that the passive structure was specifically designed to eliminate. Now, let me address the objection that is sitting in your mind right now, because it is the most common one and it is completely legitimate. What if the market crashes right after I invest? It is a fair question, and the answer is not, don't worry about it. The answer is structural. This is exactly why Component 1 includes the mortgage coverage reserve. The $52,000 Renee set aside in a high-yield savings account is not extra money sitting idle. It is a strategic buffer that covers her mortgage payment for over 2 years without forcing her to sell a single share of her investments at a loss. If the market drops 35% in year 1, which it has done before, Renee does not panic sell. She pulls from the reserve. She keeps her investments intact. She waits for the recovery. Because she is not financing her monthly survival from her investment portfolio. She engineered a 2-year firewall between market volatility and her mortgage obligation before she ever made the first payment. That reserve is not optional. It is the load-bearing wall of the entire structure. There is one more piece of this that almost nobody talks about, the tax dimension. When Renee paid cash for her house, she eliminated every tax advantage associated with homeownership simultaneously. Mortgage interest on a primary residence is tax-deductible for mortgages up to $750,000 for taxpayers who itemize. At 7% interest on a $272,000 loan, Renee's first-year interest payment is approximately $18,900. Depending on her tax bracket, that deduction is worth between $4,100 and $6,600 in actual tax savings in year 1 alone. Over the life of the mortgage, the cumulative interest deduction is substantial, and it offsets a meaningful portion of the borrowing cost that make people afraid of mortgages in the first place. The cash buyer gets none of that. Zero. They paid cash, they eliminated the deduction, and they never noticed because nobody framed it that way. The wealthy have always understood that the tax code in this country is not written for people who own things outright. It's written for people who borrow strategically, deploy capital efficiently, and use every legal structure available to reduce the cost of wealth accumulation. The mortgage interest deduction is one of the oldest and most accessible of those structures, and it is available to anyone, not just the wealthy, who chooses to use debt as a tool rather than fear it as a failure. Here is the honest caveat. This strategy is not for everyone in every circumstance. If your income is unstable and you cannot guarantee consistent mortgage payments, the reserve account structure provides a buffer, but not an infinite one. If you are within 5 to 7 years of retirement and your investment timeline is too short to absorb a significant market correction, the risk calculus changes. If the mortgage rate in your specific moment exceeds your realistic expected investment return, the spread disappears and the strategy loses its mathematical foundation. When all three are true, paying cash for a house is not the safe, conservative choice it feels like. It's the choice that quietly, invisibly, and permanently transfers hundreds of thousands of dollars in future wealth out of your life and hands it to nobody. It simply never exists. Compounding that never starts is compounding that can never catch up. Renee figured this out 4 months too late. She ran the numbers sitting at a kitchen table in a house she fully owned, feeling the specific grief of someone who did everything right by the rules she was given, and only just discovered the rules were incomplete. She can't undo it. She can refinance, pull equity out, and redeploy it, which is a strategy, but it costs closing costs and resets her mortgage timeline. The cleanest version of this decision is always the one made before the purchase, not after. You are before the purchase. Here's what you do. When you find your next house, put 20% down. Take the 30-year fixed mortgage. Take the remaining capital, the money you would have used to pay cash, and split it deliberately. The majority goes into a passive S&P 500 index fund inside a Roth IRA if your income qualifies, a taxable brokerage account if not. A portion, enough to cover 18 to 24 months of mortgage payments, goes into a high-yield savings account that you don't touch unless the market forces you to. Then you leave both alone. You don't check the investment account every week. You don't refinance the mortgage every time rates dip half a point unless the savings are mathematically significant after closing. You don't pull equity to fund lifestyle upgrades. You let the spread work. You let the compounding accelerate. You let time do what time does to money when money is deployed correctly. In 10 years, you will look at two numbers, the balance in your investment account and the equity in your home, and the combined total of those two numbers will tell you exactly how much the strategy returned above what paying cash would have produced. That number will not be small. The house is not your wealth. The house is where you live. Your wealth is the capital working in the market while the bank's money pays for the walls around you. Renee owns a house. She could own a house and a future. The difference was one decision, made once before she handed over the check. You still have that decision in front of you. Make it with the full picture, not the half of it most people are given.